All right, today we're having Christmas stories. They're from Catherine Patterson, who's a two-time recipient of both the Newbery Medal and the National Book Award for her novels. And she's written these two books of Christmas stories, and I'm reading one out of each book, and I hope I don't go over too far. The first one is called Maggie's Gift. It all started because Mr. McGee didn't want to spend Christmas under a palm tree with a hula girl. 3 weeks before Christmas, Barbara, his daughter, and her pleasant, if frivolous, husband, Gerald, had dropped their jobs and flown away to Hawaii. If the picture on the back of the postcard had been anything but a hula girl under a palm tree, he might have given their invitation to join them a second thought. After all, he thought as he spooned his lonely soup into a bowl, he'd spent the last 3 Christmases in the slush of Pittsburgh in preference of his lonely 2-room apartment. But this hula girl was too much. When he looked at her, he felt an overwhelming need for ordinariness, for stability, for heaven help him, a little dignity. Besides, he only had $50 left in his Social Security to last him out the month. And flying to Hawaii on Gerald's father's money was more than he could bear to contemplate. In fact, he told himself for the 40th time he'd sooner have Christmas all by himself than celebrate courtesy of Gerald's doting father. But since as the days crept toward the 25th, he began to experience a little hollowness. His mind had turned more and more to Christmases past, when Barbara was writing her letters to Santa Claus and his sweet voiced maid was practicing her anthems for the church service on the old upright, rushing back to the kitchen to snatch the ginger cookies out of the oven. Oh, the excitement of a little child, the tree, all of that, the gifts. McGee, he said to himself, if you don't stop this nonsense, you'll be weeping into your soup. He leaned across the kitchen table and switched on the radio to give him a little company. While for hundreds of area residents this will not be a Merry Christmas, the announcer said. They have no money for heating oil, much less toys for their children. Oh, to have children and have a wife and a family and not be able to do for them, that must be terrible for a person. At least when May was alive and Barbara was home, he always had been able to manage. How dare he feel sorry for himself? He had a little money. He could give Christmas to someone who wouldn't have it otherwise. Wasn't that what Christmas was all about? Who was that cute little woman who spoke to the retired men's fellowship at the church? Oh, Miss Trainer. She was a sort of social worker for the area churches. She would put him in touch with someone who needed help. He was so eager he could hardly look up the number for the denominational office. He said, Miss Trainer, when he got on the phone. Um, Miss Trainer was very polite. Yes, she remembered meeting Mr. McGee at the fellowship meeting last week. How was he? Well, actually, the baskets for Christmas thing was really not the best idea. Sort of a handout is demeaning to some people. Perhaps he'd like to make a donation to some ongoing work which would benefit the recipients more in the long run. He might, of course, try the Salvation Army or even his church. Mr. McGee thanked her and hung up sadly. He didn't want to mail a check. He wanted to do something. It was just like those old sentimental poems that May used to love so much. He wanted to bring a real gift to the manger. He wanted to give himself. He tried the church, but the deacons had already made arrangement for the toys and the dinners that they were giving away. Would he like to make a contribution? Mr. McGee sighed and promised 5 of his $50. He was about to commence a lecture on the pitfalls of self-pity when the phone rang. Yes, he said, Merry Christmas, Mr. McGee. It was that cute little Miss Trainer. A problem has developed, and it just hit me that you might be the very person to help. Me? Our church's children's home in Reedsville tries very hard to make it possible for all the children there to go home for Christmas. In a few cases, that's not possible. And we will find a family that's willing to take them and share Christmas with them. We have a brother and a sister in the Reedsville home, and all the plans have been made for them to stay with the family, but there's been a death in that family, and they have to go to Cleveland. So, which leaves our children without a place to go to. I would be glad to have them, but I'm going with my fiance to meet his parents. So, of course, you can't take them. Mr. McGee was trying not to get excited. I know you're very active in your church, she said. I wondered if you knew anyone. Know anyone? I can take them. He was almost shouting. Well, what about your wife, Mr. McGee? Are you sure she won't feel it's an intrusion? It was all Mr. McGee could do to keep from smiling heavenward. I'm sure she'd be delighted, he said quite truthfully. There was a pause at the other end of the wire. I want you to know that ordinarily I make a careful check of every home that takes in our children, even for short periods. Oh, of course, but there's no time. Oh, there's no time, she confirmed. We'll need to have them picked up in the morning. Please don't think me unprofessional. Oh, never, he promised. The little girl is 8 and the little boy is 5. Perfect, he said. Oh, and they've been kicked around a little bit, 4 or 5 foster homes before they landed at Reedsville. So, don't worry, Miss Trainer, he chuckled. I wasn't born yesterday. By the way, what color are they? Well, white, she says. But does it matter? He says, yes, because I have to know what color to get the doll. So he sang his way through some department stores and a Woolworths, and the doll was a huge baby that opened and closed its eyes and said, Mama. It cost 4 days of grocery, and the fire truck with the clanging bell cost 3 days worth of groceries. And he didn't have money left for a turkey, so he got a chicken. He said that'd be plenty for 3 people anyway. He'd be eating a lot of bean soup, he knew, but he didn't care. The fire truck had a wonderful bell, and when he waited for pay for it, he clanged the bell until people stared. Merry Christmas, he sang out to all the harassed clerks and grim-faced shoppers. He could hardly resist stopping total strangers to tell them of the Christmas gift he'd been given. 2 children who needed him. The next morning he was up long before dawn and at Miss Trainor's office. He walked he walked in and the children were sitting side by side in straight chairs against the wall of her cubicle. Miss Trainer got up when he came in. Oh, Mr. McGee, it's so good to see you again. This is Genevieve and this is Edgar Laughlin. She indicated the children with her free hand. Mr. McGee knelt down and put his arm around Genevieve's chair. Hi, he said gently. He didn't want to scare her. I'm Mr. McGee and I'm going to be your Christmas grandpa. The hell you say? He stood up abruptly. What did she say? He couldn't believe his ears. I said, the little girl began. Genevieve, Miss Trainer interrupted. We've been all through this. Either you go with Mr. McGee or you'll have to be the only children at the home for Christmas. So, you told me you wanted to go to the McGees. I never. She dared Miss Trainer to call her a liar. But Genevieve, Mr. McGee pleaded, you don't want to spend Christmas in an institution. I don't give a damn, she said mildly. It's Edgar who don't like institutions. They all turned to Edgar, who ducked his head and plugged up his mouth with his thumb in the corner of what had once been a blanket. Oh, all right, Edgar, Genevieve said, although Edgar had never opened his mouth. If you're going to be so stubborn about it, we'll go with the dumb freak. She slid off the chair, and Edgar did the same. Miss Trainer coughed nervously. Mr. McGee? I'm sure everything will be all right, Miss Trainer, he said, more confidently than he was feeling. You have a wonderful Christmas here. Well, thank you, Mr. McGee, handing him a small canvas bag and saying, good luck. They emerged from the building into the sunlight, and Genevieve glanced up and down. Where's your car? I don't have one anymore, he said. You hear that, Edgar? He don't even have a car. I thought you might enjoy riding the bus. Edgar wants you to know that our mother has 6 cars and 2 station wagons. Oh, is that right, Edgar? Edgar continued sucking his thumb. The apartment provided more material for Genevieve's contempt. 2 rooms? Where in the hell am I going to sleep? I thought you and Edgar could share the bed and I'd take the couch. You got to be out of your head. Edgar wets. Oh, well, we'll just have to rethink things. Edgar wants you to know that our mother has a house with 16 rooms and a chateau on the Riviera, he said. Where's the TV? Edgar always watches TV. Well, thank heavens for television, said Mr. McGee. It might get them through. It's in the bedroom, he said. Shall I bring it in here for you? You're strong enough to carry a whole TV by yourself? Was not very big, he said. And anticipating Edgar's next alleged complaint, he said, and it's black and white. I'm sure your mother said it's in full living color. Are you kidding? She's got a color set in every room. Just ask Edgar. Edgar wants you to know he ain't used to eating hot dogs, Genevieve informed Mr. McGee over the lunch table. Our mother always fixes steaks and lemon meringue pie. Oh, I wish I'd known, said Mr. McGee. My daughter used to love hot dogs. Edgar wants to know where your daughter's at. Hawaii, said Mr. McGee happily. Thank you, Barbara, for not being in Pittsburgh. But Genevieve was undaunted. Edgar wants you to know that our mother has 18 children in 18 countries around the world. That's why she couldn't have us for Christmas. She's too busy visiting them all. I see, said Mr. McGee. After linking the consultation with Edgar, during which, of course, Edgar was never heard to speak, Genevieve determined that Edgar would deign to watch the 8-inch black and white set, since there was nothing better to do in this dumb joint. Mr. McGee stretched out the dishwashing process as long as possible. What was he going to do? The thought of spending a quiet Christmas all by himself in these 2 rooms had suddenly seemed cozy and extremely desirable. The ladies on the game show were squealing with greed, and Genevieve shrieked directions. You dumb mental, take the box. No, weirdo, I told you. Oh, the excitement of little children at Christmas time. Genevieve got up at a commercial and came to the kitchen. Where's the loot? She said. The what? You know, all the junk you bought us. He was seized with terror. What was going to happen when he gave Genevieve Lofton a baby doll with a pink voile dress that closed his eyes and said, Mama? He needed time. Santa Claus won't be here till tomorrow. He decided not to add the line about the good little boys and girls. Santa Claus? Oh, come off it, Maggie. Edgar ain't believed in Santa Claus since he was 2 years old. Well, he said, feeling for his own protection, he'd better prepare her. Well, there isn't a great deal, but what there is for tomorrow morning. I don't get you, Maggie. Miss Trainer said you wanted to come home with you so you could give us a happy Christmas, and you ain't even got a Christmas tree. I bet you there ain't even any presents. Hell, at the home, at least they give you presents. And then she started yelling at the TV ladies again. Mr. McGee gulped down an Alka-Seltzer. At about 3, the game shows turned to cartoons. Get him, beat him up, Genevieve was screaming. Miss McGee had not had a headache like this since she had gotten the telegram from Barbara telling them she and Gerald had eloped. Oh, Barbara, how is it under that peaceful palm tree with the lovely dancing ladies, the gentle pounding of the sea upon the sand? Get him, kill him. Bravely he assembled the ingredients for ginger cookies. The recipe was written in May's own hand, nearly brought tears to his eyes. Genevieve wandered over. What you think you're doing? I am, keeping his voice even, making cookies. I thought you and Edgar might have fun helping me. She raised an eyebrow. Edgar wants you to know that he thinks it's sissy to make cookies. Mr. McGee tried hard not to blame anyone when he eventually burned most of them. How come we having bean soup for supper on Christmas Eve? Genevieve sniffed and sneered. I'm sure your mother has filet, Mr. McGee said, but I was saving the chicken, he emphasized the word, for Christmas dinner, and this is the best I can do tonight. Well, Edgar wants you to know that ain't nobody going to make him eat this slop. Out of the corner of his eyes, Mr. McGee noted with satisfaction that Edgar had put down his blanket long enough to pick up his spoon. Nobody is going to make Edgar or anyone else eat anything, Mr. McGee fell to his soup and studiously ignored her. My mother, she said finally, would die if she knew we was here. So would mine, said Mr. McGee, but not out loud. Genevieve flounced over to the couch and plopped down. Come over here, Edgar, she said. You don't have to eat that mess. Edgar put his spoon down reluctantly. Leave Edgar alone, Mr. McGee says. He's enjoying his supper. Listen here, Maggie, I don't know what you got in mind, but I ain't standing by letting my little brother poison himself. A foreign feeling was rising rapidly with Mr. McGee's gut. He belatedly recognized it as the urge to kill. Edgar looked from one to the other and poked his thumb and blanket back into his mouth and started for the couch. Genevieve smiled in triumph and patted the spot. Don't you be scared of anything, Edgar. I'm going to take care of you. And she snapped on the TV loud. McGee took the room in 3 strides, turned off the set, and says, I can't stand any more TV today, he said. What in the devil do you expect us to do? I do not expect you to do anything in the devil. It is Christmas Eve, he said. We are going to church. Church? You got to be kidding. I've never been more serious in my life. Well, Edgar wants you to know. If Edgar wants me to know anything, he can tell me himself. Boy, if my mother, your mother, is not here, if I had the faintest notion where she might be found, believe me, I would call a cab and take you to her this very night. However, she is unavailable and Edgar is uncommunicative. It is just you and me, Genevieve Lawton. I don't know about you, but I know about me. I can't take one more minute of your big mouth smarty pants. Hey, Maggie. And don't you dare say, hey, Maggie, me. Wait and close your mouth. I'm going into the bedroom and lie down until time to go to church. If you dare turn this TV set on, I will come in here and personally smack your bottom. Do you understand? Edgar was nodding solemnly. Genevieve was staring at Mr. McGee. Slowly she closed her wide open mouth. He slammed the door, flung himself across the bed. Oh, Lord, forgive me. What was that verse about being better to have a millstone around your neck than a child? No, no, it was better to have a millstone around your neck and be thrown into the depths of the sea than to offend one of God's little ones. Something like that. Genevieve, are you one of his little ones? Are you? The apartment was quiet except for the humming of the refrigerator. The raging inside him began to calm. He almost drifted off when he sensed someone was there. He opened his eyes, and Edgar's smeared face hung above his own. Genevieve, the little voice whispered, he's alive. Mr. McGee sat up and held out a hand toward the boy. Edgar drew back, but before he had popped his thumb in, Mr. McGee saw the mouth stretch into a tiny smile. At church, both Genevieve and Edgar were models of docility. Mr. McGee sang the carols with unusual gusto, pointing his finger to each word in the hymnal. They sat politely through the prayers and scriptures and sermon. After the service, he took them up front and showed them the creche with the shepherds and the wise men and tiny baby Jesus and the great tree with all the decorations, trying to make up a little for his barren apartment. They gazed solemnly at everything. Only once, when his friend little Miss Abernathy was gushing over his wonderfulness at taking in these homeless children into his own home, did Mr. McGee catch Genevieve with a wry smile on her face, and he smiled back. The Abernathys drove them home, and Genevieve and Edgar sat on either side of him in the back seat, straight and silent. In the apartment, he made some cocoa, and they ate the few cookies that were unburned. That's really weird, Maggie. Mr. McGee was so startled to hear Genevieve's voice after the hours of silence, he forgot to be offended by the nickname. What's weird, Genevieve? Me and Edgar was born at City General. Yes? That didn't seem weird to Mr. McGee. Well, your Jesus guy didn't even have a place to get born in. Well, that's right, Genevieve. It's like he was a foster kid before he was even born. Mr. McGee swallowed. Edgar, what you got in your hand? Edgar tightened his fist, but Genevieve pried an open finger. Oh, God, she said, he stole the baby Jesus from the church. She took the little plastic creche figure and put it into Mr. McGee's hand, sighing deeply, and then she turned to the panic-stricken Edgar, who held his sucking thumb clenched between his teeth. Maggie wants you to know, Edgar, that there ain't no use screaming for your mother. It's just you and me and him, and he's so mad at you, he's about to personally smack your bottom. She turned to Mr. McGee with a proud smile for confirmation. Mr. McGee didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Instead, he put his arm around the distraught little thief. I don't think you meant to steal the baby, did you? Edgar looked up and shook his head solemnly. You see there, Genevieve, he didn't mean to steal the baby. He just didn't want Jesus to have to spend Christmas in an institution. Isn't that right, Edgar? Edgar nodded. Genevieve shot Mr. McGee a quizzical look, but didn't argue. And as Mr. McGee wrote Barbara and Gerald the next day, the three of them had a great Christmas. Edgar loved the doll, and Genevieve never once claimed that their mother had 15 much larger fire trucks in her country house. This one has a slightly different tone, but I hope you'll enjoy it. It's called Exultate Jubilate. Christmas is over. Sally is putting the children to bed, and I'm sitting in the living room staring at a rocking horse and trying to figure out what happened to me last night. You must understand, first of all, that I've always entertained a certain sympathy for Scrooge. There he was, going about his business as best he knew how, while all around him the world was going mad. 'Tis the season to be jolly? Come now, what is there to be jolly or merry or even mildly happy about? How could anyone who watches the evening news on a daily basis work up a case of holiday cheer? Frankly, I weary of Christmas carols that start jangling at Halloween and the lampposts and all of that. My wife is another story. She goes into a frenzy of decorating and baking. I want my kids to be happy, but it's hard to be patient when they pester me for months for junk that they've watched and seen advertised on TV. And can someone explain to me why, as the days grow shorter, the pitch of children's voices get higher and higher? Besides, this year business has been, if not bad, certainly not robust, and I simply don't have the money, not to mention the goodwill and energy, to waste on what latest fad. So the only reason I don't go around literally grunting bah humbug this year was because of the kids. They're only 3 and 6, and I'm enough of a hypocrite not to try to ruin their excitement, much as my head aches to tone down the shrill. But somehow I drew the line at going to the Christmas Eve service last night. Once I slid out from under my mother's thou shalt nots, I became quite happily a Christmas and Easter Christian, and whenever my mother was visiting. But this year, even Christmas seemed too much. I told my wife I would stay behind to organize the stocking gifts and put the rocking horse together. Every year it's 2 or 3 in the morning before we can get to bed, and then we're too angry with each other to sleep. The year of Mike's tricycle was a low point in Christmases past. One reason Jenny was getting a rocking horse. The children would be so disappointed if you don't go, she said. Oh, they don't really expect me to go to church. But it's snowing, and you know I hate to drive in the snow. But I bought you that fancy Subaru, so you had 4-wheel drive. But I don't like leaving you all by yourself, she said. You'll get gloomy and moody. In 2 hours, I whispered, lest any little ears were nearby, I'll have that rocking horse put together. All we'll have to do is stuff the stockings and dream of sugar plums. That instant, she remembered all too well that long night of the tricycle. Daddy isn't feeling up to church tonight, she told the children. I coughed obligingly and helped her zipper the snowsuits and yank on the boots and happily waved them off to church. A half hour later, I was not so happy. The rocking horse that I'd carefully purchased was proving, in my mother's picturesque phrase, an instrument of the devil. It was not on rockers, but attached to its stand by huge coil springs. I had, by the hardest effort, pulled 3 of the 4 springs and hooked them into the stand. Every time I got to the 4th one nearly in pace, straining and straining and cussing, the spring would recoil viciously. I was glumly staring into the living room fireplace with a large brandy in my hand when the doorbell rang. My impulse was to ignore it because I knew Sally had the garage door opener. Who would be dropping by for a visit at this hour? The bell rang twice before I roused myself and shuffled to the door. Through the peephole, I saw a youngish-looking man wearing a windbreaker, but his hands and head were bare, and he was carrying a cardboard box. He looked frozen. I opened the door and said, yes. He smiled. Would you like to buy some Christmas greens? The man had obviously not seen the inside of our home. Sorry, I said, starting to close the door. Well, Merry Christmas, he said. Then I remembered the stupid horse. Maybe this guy could help. So I opened the door wide. "Come in," I said, with heartiness so false that any fool would have suspected me of being up to no good. "Come in and get warm at least. You must be frozen." He put down his box of greens and stamped the snow off. Stepped in gratefully. "Not many sales tonight," he said. "I expect most people are all ready for Christmas." "Yeah," I said, "maybe I can get you something hot. I think there's still some coffee." "Oh, that would be so nice." He followed me down the greenery festooned hall to the kitchen. "Wow, you sure don't need any more greens. You're loaded." "My wife's a little bit crazy on the subject of Christmas," I said, pouring out a mug of coffee. He held his mug out for me to put in the milk and then the sugar. And "Thank you," he said, stirring deliberately while he looked around the kitchen. It was decorated all over, and there was even smell good. "It smells like Christmas," he said. I hadn't noticed, but in addition to the evergreens, the room was smelling of the warm odor of cinnamon and cloves and Christmas bread that Sally had baked that afternoon. "Nice, isn't it?" he said. "Oh, yeah, I suppose so, if you like that sort of thing." My mind was getting up the horse done before Sally and the children got back. I couldn't well snatch the coffee out of his hands. "I guess you have a pretty tree, too." Well, what could I do? He obviously wanted to see our tree. I led him back down the hall to the living room. Our house is not one of those energy efficient moderns. It's a Victorian with a 15-foot ceiling. I think Sally picked out the house so she could have a monster Christmas tree. There's certainly no other reason for the ceiling of that height. You should see our heating bill. The visitor was standing there, his mouth open, his eyes shining like a 3-year-old. "That's the most beautiful tree I've ever saw in my life," he whispered. "Well, yes, well," I felt almost apologetic. "My wife." He turned, his face still full of awe. "She must be a wonderful person." "Well, as wives go," I tried to joke, but it wasn't going to work. This guy was as sincere as a cocker spaniel. "Don't let your coffee get cold," I said. He ducked his head and took a sip. Over the rim, he eyed my sound system. Oh dear, maybe he was casing the joint. I took his elbow to steer him to the family room where our 3-legged rocking horse was waiting. "I know I shouldn't ask," he smiled. "It's impossible to believe that such a lovely smile, cracked lips, and all belonged to a potential thief. I mean, you've been so nice, but I'm so hungry for real music, just while I'm drinking your good coffee." He looked hungry for meat and potatoes, but how could I refuse such a request? "Okay," I said, "as a bargain. You can choose any music in the cabinet if you let me put together a rocking horse for my daughter." His smile broke into a laugh. "I'm getting the best end of that deal." He handed me his still almost full cup and fairly ran to the cabinet. He fingered the CDs and lovingly, and I wondered what he might choose. There wasn't much there that would appeal to a person of his class. There were dozens of Christmas carols, even one, "So Help Me," about with chipmunks singing. "Here," he said, "this one, please." "Are you sure?" He had handed me Mozart, the London Symphony recording of Mozart's sacred music. Now, wouldn't you have been surprised? "Do you mind?" he asked anxiously when he saw my hesitation. "Oh, of course not," I said. "I don't look like a Mozart lover, right?" His smile was on crooked now. "Well, there was no way of getting out of that one." I inserted the CD. I waited for the great Kyrie in D minor to boom out, and after adjusting the sound slightly, picked up the coffee cups and started for the family room. "Oh no," he grabbed my wrist. "Listen, the Kyrie eleison," the voices demanded. "Lord have mercy. Christe eleison, Christ have mercy." I thought I'd heard it before, but I realized as I looked at my visitor that I never really heard it. His eyes were closed. I felt distinctly uncomfortable. "Come on," I said, slipping my wrist out from under his hand. "We've got to get that fool horse done before my family gets home." He opened his eyes and looked at me. I thought he was going to object. "Yes, our bargain," he said. "It's in there." And I said, "The music goes all over the house." "Oh," he breathed, "that's wonderful. You can live in music." He followed me to the den. And there sat, or should I say, sagged the horse, with Mozart showering down upon its head. "If you pull this spring," I said, "I'll try to yank this side in toward you, and you can hook it." He was listening to the Kyrie and not to me. I hated to interrupt, but we did have that bargain. The horse, I said, a little bit of urgency. They're likely to get home soon. He nodded, but I knew he wasn't paying attention to me. I should have been angry, but somehow he was forcing me to listen to the music too. I handed him back his coffee. Just do the Kyrie, all right, I said. Then we do the horse. I'm not sure if he heard, but he sat on the floor and his head cocked toward the wall mounted speaker. I sat on the couch watching him listen, but it was not a stranger's profile I was seeing, but the face of my father singing that very Mozart one Christmas time when the civic chorus had decided against the usual Messiah. My father died when I was 17, so I must have been a young teenager. I loved to watch my father sing. Of all the faces in the chorus, his was the one that appeared to be listening rather than showing off. He always seemed to believe the music that he sang. And although I was an arrogant kid full of questions and resisting any answer, I loved his humble reverence that I saw in him. I never told him, though. It wouldn't have been cool or neat or whatever we said back then. And then he died. I went to the kitchen and cut a piece of Sally's Christmas bread and brought it to the stranger to make up for never having told my father that I loved to watch him sing. You're too kind, the young man murmured. Me? Too kind? Lord have mercy indeed. How I wondered in some future Christmas would my children remember me. Certainly not as I remembered my father, his face glowing with the glory of the music he sang. I could almost see a huge festive table with a grown-up Mike and Jenny and their families gathered around, and Sally, white and wrinkled, but still not a bad-looking woman. I wish your father could be here today, she was saying. Dad? Mike was frowning. He'd hate it. I mean, the very fact that we are here would mean that civilization hadn't blown itself to bits. You know how he hated to be proved wrong about anything. Mike, what a thing to say. That a girl, Sally. You remember the news bulletins? Mike went on. Children. Now, Jenny, my sweet little girl, had jumped into it, talking to her children. Children, the minute the tree went up, your grandfather would begin reading aloud items from the newspaper to prove how awful the world was. There was no peace, no goodwill, no hope, no joy. Exultate jubilate, the choir sang out. With a chill of relief, I shook off the ghost of Christmas yet to come, turned my attention again to my visitor. His face shone as his cracked lips moved, mouthing the Latin words of joy and exaltation. How could he, with his raw face and chapped and bleeding hands, be joyful? How, in fact, could the starving Mozart have known such a moment of exquisite joy? How could a baby born in a barn bring such beauty, such glory into this greedy, self-destructive, cruel world? Suddenly I heard the clack of the garage door. I jumped from the couch. Oh, they're back. Oh! The young man hastily picked the crumbs off his windbreaker, popped them into his mouth. I'm sorry, he said. I was lost. It's too late. I'll get them in the front room. You just slip out when you can. Make sure the door is shut. He looked puzzled, maybe a little hurt. The horse, I explained. I don't want the children to see it. I slammed the family room door on his confused and embarrassed face. What glorious music, Sally said as I met them in the back hall. It makes me feel like being jubilant. She's a beautiful woman, especially when she's happy. I'm glad you have been listening to Mozart, she continued, taking off her hat, shaking out her lovely hair. I rather pictured a different scenario. She gave me a wry look. Okay, I said to the children, let's take off those boots in the back hall. It's cold, Daddy, back here. Let's take them off in the family room. Now, I said, no complaints, joy to the world, all that. 'Cause it's Christmas, Jenny shrilled, and her voice didn't pierce through me as it had earlier. You tickle, she giggles, and she put her fat little arms around my neck. I bent closer to the boots so she wouldn't see my eyes. I was feeling very rich. We had our family time together before the living room fire. I never heard the stranger leave, but then it must have been some time after the Alleluia. I can't imagine he would have left before that heavenly Alleluia. This has been a lovely evening, Sally sighed as she tied the ribbon on the last package. The nicest Christmas Eve I can remember. Yes, I said, thanks to you, everything is so beautiful and smells so good. She laughed. It's the same every year. I didn't think you noticed, except for the bills. Well, I noticed, and I like it. It was your music that did it for me, she said. I wouldn't have thought of Mozart for Christmas Eve, but it's perfect. You have no idea how it felt to open the door and hear that magnificent exultate come pouring out. What a wonderful idea. Then I remember the horse and the stranger I'd left in the family room. Oh, Sally, I totally forgot as I rushed down the hall. I opened the door. He was gone, of course. I think I was relieved. I'm sure I wouldn't have known how to explain him. Sally was behind me. You did it, she exclaimed. Good work. Then I realized that the horse was no longer sagging, but stood upright, proudly stretched on all four legs, ready to gallop its way into Christmas. The stranger had kept his side of the bargain. So here I sit on Christmas Day trying to figure it all out. Who would believe that a man who is still closer kin to Scrooge than to Tiny Tim would, on a bleak midwinter night, be visited by an angel? I think I'll go put on the Mozart.